Matthew chapter 4 opens right after a divine moment, Jesus' baptism. The heavens opened, a voice declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." But then, the Spirit leads him into the wilderness. Imagine that, from the waters of glory straight into the wilderness of testing. This is where the story of power truly begins. Not in comfort, not in fame, but in struggle. Because before God uses you publicly, He shapes you privately. For 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus fasts. No bread, no rest, just prayer and solitude. Every moment strips away comfort until only faith remains. The enemy sees this moment and approaches, not as a monster, but as a whisper. "If you are the Son of God," he says, "turn these stones into bread." It sounds harmless, even logical. Jesus is hungry. He has the power. But this first temptation is about something far deeper, dependence. Jesus answers, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." That one sentence cuts straight through time. It tells us that true life doesn't come from what we consume. It comes from what God speaks. Every believer will face the same test. Will I feed my flesh or my faith? When you're in your own wilderness, broke, tired, unseen, that's where your heart reveals what it truly depends on. Will you chase quick satisfaction or trust divine timing? The second temptation takes Jesus to the pinnacle of the temple. Satan twists scripture, daring him to jump. For it is written, "He will command his angels concerning you." This is the test of pride, the temptation to prove yourself. And many of us fall right here. We want to be seen, validated, celebrated. But Jesus refuses to play that game. He answers, "You shall not put the Lord your God to the test." It's a quiet, steady refusal, the kind that comes from confidence in God, not the approval of people. And then comes the final temptation, the most dangerous of all. Satan shows him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, saying, "All these I will give you if you bow down and worship me." This is the test of power, the promise of success without sacrifice, the shortcut that tempts every soul. But Jesus stands firm. "Get behind me, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." 3 temptations, 3 victories. Each one reveals not just Jesus' holiness, but the path every believer must walk. The wilderness was not a punishment. It was preparation, because right after this, scripture says, "Then the devil left him, and angels came and ministered to him." It's such a small line, but it's everything. When you endure the test, heaven always responds. The angels didn't come in the beginning, they came after victory. That's the rhythm of God's process. Test first, triumph later. And it's right here, in this dusty wilderness, that the greatest ministry on earth is born. No audience, no stage, no applause, just obedience. Matthew 4 reminds us that our deserts are not empty places. They're divine classrooms. When you feel alone, when you feel like nothing is moving, remember Jesus started here too. The wilderness doesn't mean you're forgotten. It means you're being formed. The same Spirit that led Jesus into the desert is the Spirit that will lead you through yours. And when you come out, you won't be the same. Because every trial leaves a mark, a holy strength you never had before. Jesus came out of the wilderness not weaker, but empowered, ready to face the world, ready to bring light into darkness. When Jesus stepped out of the wilderness, he didn't come out defeated or drained. He came out different. There's a certain stillness in his eyes now, a quiet authority that can't be taught. The kind that only comes from wrestling with darkness and walking out untouched. Matthew 4 moves quickly from testing to purpose. The same chapter that began in isolation now shifts to movement and mission. It's like the moment before dawn, when the sky softens and the first colors of light start breaking over the horizon. Jesus heads north, into Galilee, a place buzzing with life, but shadowed by struggle. After John the Baptist is imprisoned, Jesus begins his public ministry there, not in Jerusalem, not among the powerful, but in a humble fishing region. And that choice says everything. because God often starts his greatest works in the most ordinary places. Matthew writes, "The people living in darkness have seen a great light." That line hits like lightning. It's not just about physical light. It's about hope returning to a world that forgot how to believe. Galilee was full of fishermen, farmers, mothers, and merchants. Regular people weighed down by Roman rule, daily labor, and quiet despair. They didn't expect a Messiah to walk their streets. But Jesus begins right there, among the unnoticed. His first message is simple but world-shaking. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. That word repent doesn't mean shame or guilt. It means turn around. It's an invitation to redirect your whole life towards something higher, something eternal. He wasn't calling them to religion. He was calling them to relationship. Not to rules, but to a kingdom. One not built by men, but by mercy. And from that moment, everything begins to move. As he walks along the Sea of Galilee, he sees two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and Andrew, casting a net into the lake. Fishermen just doing what they've done every day. Jesus stops. He looks at them, not as fishermen, but as future builders of faith. "Follow me," he says, "and I will make you fishers of men." There's no sales pitch, no promise of wealth or safety, just an invitation. And they drop everything, nets, boats, livelihood, and follow him. Something in his voice must have carried eternal weight, because when truth speaks, the soul recognizes it. A little farther, he meets James and John, repairing their nets with their father. Same invitation, same response. They leave immediately. In just a few verses, we watch the first disciples form, for ordinary men stepping into extraordinary purpose. And it's worth noticing, Jesus doesn't go to the temple to recruit scholars. He goes to the shoreline to call workers. People with rough hands, honest hearts, and a hunger for meaning. Matthew 4 paints this beautiful picture. Jesus walking along the water's edge, the sound of waves mixing with his words, the sun setting behind him, and 4 men following, unsure of what lies ahead, but certain that they've met someone worth following. Then the miracles begin. He starts traveling through all of Galilee, teaching in synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. Everywhere he goes, crowds gather. People bring the sick, the tormented, the paralyzed, and he heals them all. No one is too broken, no pain too deep. And just like that, the wilderness becomes the foundation of a movement that will change the world. But look closely, this chapter doesn't just show us what Jesus did, it shows how God works. Before public ministry comes private testing. Before influence comes intimacy. Before light shines through you, it must refine you. Everything that happened in the desert prepared him for this moment, for crowds, for conflict, for calling disciples, for carrying the weight of broken humanity. And that's why Matthew 4 is so powerful. It's not just history, it's a blueprint. Every believer who wants to live with purpose must walk this same pattern. Temptation, surrender, calling, impact. You can't skip the wilderness, but you don't have to stay there. Because the moment you surrender your hunger for control, God begins to move you toward your calling. Galilee wasn't glamorous, but it was ready. And maybe that's where you are right now, in a quiet season, feeling small or unseen. But perhaps God is whispering, "Follow me," and preparing you for something beyond your imagination. Every great story of faith starts with that same invitation and the courage to say yes. By the end of Matthew 4, Jesus isn't just walking, he's leading. He's gathering people, bringing healing, restoring hope, and showing the first glimpse of what heaven looks like on earth. But there's something even deeper hidden in this chapter, something most readers miss. Every healing, every word, every step he takes is fulfilling prophecy. The words of Isaiah that spoke of a coming light to the land of Zebulun and Naphtali. That means nothing in his journey was random. Not the wilderness, not Galilee, not the people he chose. Every detail was written long before it happened. And that's a reminder for us. God doesn't waste details. Even the hard parts of your story are pieces of his plan. The same Spirit that led Jesus through testing also led him into purpose. And that's how divine order works. Pain before power, stillness before movement, surrender before glory. As the crowds start to follow him, something begins to shift in the air. The world doesn't know it yet, but history is changing forever. Because this is no longer just a man walking through Galilee. This is the Word made flesh, carrying heaven into human streets. Matthew 4 closes with a vision of momentum. People from Galilee, Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan following him. A movement born in silence is now echoing across nations. And the next step will lead to one of the greatest teachings ever spoken, the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. But before we move there, pause for a moment. Because the message of Matthew 4 isn't just about Jesus, it's about you. When you come out of your own wilderness, tired but faithful, heaven will open new doors. When you surrender what's familiar, God will multiply what's left. The wilderness doesn't end your story, it starts it. And Galilee isn't far away. It's waiting on the other side of your yes. So take a deep breath. Step forward. The same Jesus who walked out of the desert is walking with you now. And from this point on, the light begins to spread. When we left off, the light had just begun to spread. Jesus had stepped out of the wilderness and into Galilee, calling ordinary men to an extraordinary mission. Crowds were gathering, miracles were multiplying, and whispers of hope were starting to move through dusty towns that had forgotten what joy felt like. But what happens next is the heart of Matthew 4, not just a record of events, but a revelation of how God builds his kingdom. It doesn't begin with armies, wealth, or temples. It begins with people. Simple people, imperfect people, people like Simon, Andrew, James, and John, who just days ago were hauling fish from a net and counting coins on a dock. When Jesus called them, he didn't say, "Be perfect." He said, "Follow me." And that small invitation flipped their lives upside down. They didn't know what the path would look like. They didn't know that it would lead to healing the sick, feeding thousands, or even facing persecution. But something in his presence made the unknown feel safe. That's what the call of Christ does. It doesn't promise ease. It awakens purpose. And Matthew foreshows how Jesus begins to shape his followers before he sends them. He doesn't just give them tasks, he gives them identity. You will be fishers of men, he said. Think about that metaphor. Fishing requires patience, timing, skill, and faith that what you cannot see will eventually surface. That's ministry. That's influence. That's kingdom work. Jesus was saying, you already know how to fish. I'm just changing what you're fishing for. That's the beauty of divine calling. God doesn't discard your past. He redeems it. The same hands that once mended nets would soon lay hands on the sick. The same voices that shouted over waves would one day preach over nations. This is the transformation that Matthew 4 begins. The slow, sacred process of turning ordinary into holy. Now, picture the scene. Jesus walking ahead, his new disciples following. The roads are narrow. The air smells of sea salt and olive trees. Villagers pause to watch them pass. A carpenter from Nazareth with a group of fishermen at his heels. No one knows that history is walking by. Soon, he begins to teach, not in grand halls, but on hillsides and streets. His message isn't complex, but it cuts through noise. The kingdom of heaven is near. Those words are a revolution in themselves. People were used to waiting for the kingdom, something distant, someday maybe. But Jesus says, it's near. As in right here, right now among you. Every time he heals someone, forgives someone, or shows mercy, it's a glimpse of that kingdom. It's heaven breaking into earth through compassion. And the disciples, they're watching, learning, absorbing every move. They see him touch lepers, bless children, talk to the outcast, and break the walls of tradition. Slowly, they realize, this kingdom isn't about power, it's about love. That realization would take time to grow, but this is where it starts, in Matthew 4. Now imagine how they felt. One moment, they're unknown. The next, they're walking beside the most extraordinary man the world will ever know. They've seen miracles already, the sick rising, the hopeless smiling. And yet, what moves them most isn't the power. It's the presence. Jesus has this way of making everyone feel seen. Peter's impulsiveness, Andrew's quiet strength, James's temper, John's tenderness. He sees it all and uses it all. He doesn't choose people because they're ready. He chooses them because they're willing. And that's something we all need to hear. God's call rarely comes when you feel qualified. It comes when you finally stop running. Maybe that's you right now, feeling ordinary, stuck in the same daily rhythm. But the same voice that called those fishermen is calling you too. Follow me. Not because you're perfect, but because he's patient. Not because you're strong, but because he's faithful. The miracle of Matthew 4 isn't just what Jesus did, it's who he chose. Every great move of God begins with someone who simply says yes. And as the disciples follow, their yes begins to cost them something: time, comfort, familiarity. They start walking further, talking less, and listening more. The mission is taking shape, though they don't fully see it yet. One night, they sit by a fire near the Sea of Galilee. The waves lap gently, and the stars hang low. Peter stares at the flame, wondering what he's gotten himself into. John, always the dreamer, watches Jesus in silence. And Jesus just sits there, peaceful, gazing out at the dark horizon, as if he already sees the cross waiting beyond it, but chooses love anyway. It's in moments like that when the disciples begin to sense following him isn't about knowing everything, it's about trusting him when you know nothing. This is how faith is formed, not in clarity, but in closeness. Matthew 4 isn't just the start of Jesus' ministry, it's the start of discipleship itself. It's the moment the world begins to change, one heart at a time. The crowds soon grow. News of his power spreads across Galilee, Syria, and beyond. People start walking for miles just to hear him speak. Mothers bring their sick children. Men carry their paralyzed friends on mats. And every single one who comes finds healing. But the miracles aren't just signs, they're lessons. Every healing is a sermon about restoration. Every deliverance is a prophecy of the cross. By healing bodies, Jesus was pointing to something greater, the healing of souls. And that's what makes Matthew 4 the foundation of the gospel. It shows how heaven begins to break through human walls, first in deserts, then in hearts, then in entire regions. We see in Jesus not just divine power, but divine gentleness. He doesn't demand worship, he invites it. He doesn't crush the weak, he restores them. And through this, the disciples start to understand this kingdom isn't built by force, but by faith. Their journey is just beginning. They don't yet know about the storms, the betrayals, the miracles still to come. But something unshakable has begun inside them. The seed of the church, planted right here in Matthew 4. The world is about to change forever, but not through politics or war. Through 12 hearts learning what it means to love like God. And as Jesus walks toward the next hill, where he will soon sit and speak the words we now call the Sermon on the Mount, his followers walk behind him, a small group, carrying the spark of something eternal. The air in Galilee is different now. Crowds have begun to follow Jesus everywhere he goes. Fishermen, farmers, mothers holding sick children, elders leaning on canes, even the curious and the skeptical. The quiet man who walked out of the wilderness has become a voice that no one can ignore. But instead of seeking power or a throne, Jesus climbs a mountain. It's early morning. Mist hangs low over the hills, and the people gather below, waiting for him to speak. His disciples sit near him, still amazed at how quickly everything is changing. And then he begins. His words are gentle, but cut through the air like sunlight. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The crowd goes silent. No one expected this. The kingdom he spoke of isn't for the rich, the proud, or the powerful. It's for the humble, the hurting, the ones who've been overlooked. This moment marks the shift from the story of Jesus calling to the revelation of his mission. Matthew 4 led us to this exact mountain, where heaven speaks directly to earth. The disciples, still fresh from their fishing nets, listen closely. They hear him speak of mercy, purity, and peace, of forgiveness and love, of being light in a dark world. Every word feels new, yet deeply familiar, as if these truths were written into their souls long before they heard them. But to understand the power of this moment, we have to remember how it started. Just weeks ago, Jesus was fasting in the wilderness, battling temptation and loneliness. Now, he stands above thousands, shaping eternity with every sentence. That's how God works. Your wilderness always leads to a mountain. When he says, "Blessed are those who mourn," he's not glorifying sadness. He's showing that even in grief, there is divine comfort. When he says, "Blessed are the meek," he redefines strength. It's not about dominance. It's about restraint guided by love. Every beatitude overturns the world's values. It's heaven rewriting the rules of earth. And the people are stunned because they expected a Messiah who would overthrow Rome, not one who would heal hearts. They expected revolution through power, but Jesus brings transformation through compassion. As he continues, his words start painting a picture of the kingdom he spoke about in Matthew 4. A kingdom that doesn't need walls or armies, because it's built inside people. He looks at his disciples and says, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden." Imagine how those fishermen must have felt. A few months ago, they were unknown, working in the shadows. Now, the Son of God tells them they are light, vessels through which the world will see God's glory. It's not flattery, it's destiny. Jesus is showing them that the same Spirit that sustained him in the wilderness now lives within them. The same power that overcame darkness in him will soon flow through them. He's not just preaching, he's passing the torch. As he speaks, the crowd begins to sense something holy. There's authority in his tone, not harsh but certain. The kind that comes from truth, not position. He doesn't quote others. He speaks as if heaven itself is breathing through him. Because it is. The disciples look at each other in awe. They realize they're not just following a teacher. They're sitting with the Word made flesh, the living message of God. And yet, his message is painfully simple. Love God, love people, live differently. He warns them that this light won't always be welcomed. That following him will cost comfort, reputation, maybe even life. But he promises something greater, eternal purpose. That's the heartbeat of Matthew 4 flowing forward. Purpose through surrender, strength through obedience. You see, the wilderness was about testing his identity. The mountain is about revealing his identity. What he conquered in private, he now proclaims in public. The crowd listens, hanging on every word. And while some understand, most just feel something stirring deep within, a longing, a spark of recognition that this man speaks the language of their soul. He continues for hours, unfolding truths about forgiveness, humility, generosity, and love for enemies. These aren't just rules. They're revelations of what heaven looks like lived out on earth. The disciples realize that following him isn't just about miracles. It's about becoming different, becoming light. As the sun begins to set behind the hills, Jesus' final words linger in the air like a promise. Therefore, be perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect. Perfection here doesn't mean flawlessness. It means wholeness, maturity, completeness in love. And that's what this mountain moment is all about, teaching humanity how to be whole again. When he finishes, there's a long silence, then murmurs, then quiet tears. People begin to walk down the mountain, carrying the weight of his words in their hearts. Some are confused, some are comforted, but no one is the same. The disciples stay for a moment longer, still staring at him, the man who turned their understanding of the world upside down in one afternoon. They don't realize it yet, but this is just the beginning. Soon they'll witness storms calmed, lepers cleansed, the dead raised, and the lost redeemed. But for now, they sit quietly, hearts burning with something new, faith that has taken root. And as the wind moves through the grass, Jesus looks toward the horizon again, toward towns that still need light, toward people who still wander in darkness. He knows his journey will not be easy. But every step, every teaching, every healing is a piece of the same story, the one that began when the Spirit led him into the wilderness. Because the same Spirit that tested him there now speaks through him here. And this is the message that begins to echo across generations. You don't need to be powerful to change the world. You just need to be faithful. The wilderness built his endurance. The mountain revealed his purpose. And the valley ahead will display his love. From here, Jesus will walk down the mountain into the lives of those who need him most. The broken, the forgotten, the sinners who think they've gone too far. Because the true test of light isn't how bright it shines on the mountain. It's how steady it burns in the valley. The mountain fades behind them. The crowd slowly scatter down the slopes, carrying echoes of Jesus' words in their hearts. Blessed are the pure in spirit. You are the light of the world. The air is cooler now. The day is fading, but something unseen is just beginning to rise. A wave of faith, invisible yet unstoppable. Jesus walks ahead, his steps calm and unhurried. Behind him, his disciples follow, eyes wide, hearts racing, still trying to process what they've just witnessed. They had gone up the mountain as fishermen. They came down as messengers. But what happens next shows them what his words look like in action. Not far from the mountain, a man with leprosy approaches. His clothes are torn, his face half hidden, and people step away as he walks. In that time, lepers were outcasts, untouchable, unseen, forced to live apart from everyone they loved. But this man kneels before Jesus and whispers, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." And in that moment, heaven moves again. Jesus doesn't step back. He steps closer. He reaches out his hand, a simple, sacred gesture, and touches him. "I am willing," he says. "Be clean." Instantly, the disease disappears. The man's skin clears, his eyes fill with tears, and for the first time in years, someone has touched him. The disciples stand speechless. They've seen many things, but this is different. The kingdom Jesus spoke about is no longer just words. It's power, compassion, and restoration in motion. That's how heaven works. Not with distance, but with closeness. Not with rules, but with relationship. The news spreads fast. By the time Jesus and his followers reach the next village, crowds are already waiting. The sick, the broken, the desperate. And he doesn't turn anyone away. Matthew writes that Jesus went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every sickness among the people. Every sickness, every burden, every soul that came to him with a flicker of hope found mercy waiting. One by one, people encounter the living God, not in temples, but in the streets. A mother cries as her child, once paralyzed, stands for the first time. A blind man sees light after years of darkness. A woman who's been rejected by her village finds forgiveness and belonging. The disciples can barely keep up. Everywhere they go, crowds press in, hungry for a touch, a word, a sign. And in the midst of it all, Jesus remains calm, steady, kind, present. He never rushes. He never refuses. He listens, heals, and moves on to the next town, leaving trails of restored lives behind him. But these miracles aren't just displays of power, they're glimpses of grace. Every healing reveals a deeper truth, that God is not far away. He is near and he cares. What started in the wilderness, that private battle of faith and obedience, is now transforming entire regions. That's the rhythm of Matthew 4 unfolding into the world. The same spirit that sustained him in testing now flows through him in power. Each miracle is a sermon. Each act of compassion is a declaration. The kingdom of heaven is here. And the disciples are learning, not just by listening, but by watching. They start to see that this kingdom isn't about authority or fame. It's about love that stoops low enough to lift others up. Late one night, after a long day of healing, they rest near a small fire by the water's edge. Peter leans back, exhausted, watching the flames dance. Andrew whispers, "I've never seen anyone love like that." John nods. It's like he sees something in people no one else can see. Jesus sits nearby, silent, watching the stars. His face is calm, but his eyes hold a deep sadness, a knowing that not everyone will understand this love, that one day the same hands that heal will be nailed to a cross. But for now, he keeps going. Every step, every word, every miracle is leading somewhere, toward the fulfillment of a plan written since the beginning of time. As they move from town to town, crowds swell. People shout his name. Some call him a prophet. Some call him a teacher. A few are beginning to whisper, Messiah. But not everyone is pleased. The religious leaders grow uneasy. The attention he's getting threatens their control. They watch from a distance, suspicious and silent. Still, Jesus continues. He's not building a movement based on fear or fame. He's building a kingdom based on faith. One afternoon, a Roman centurion approaches, a man of authority, foreign by blood and faith. He kneels before Jesus and says, "My servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly." Without hesitation, Jesus replies, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion says something remarkable. "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed." Jesus smiles, moved by the man's faith. "Truly I tell you," he says, "I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith." And with a word, the servant is healed. The disciples exchange glances. Faith can cross any boundary, Jew or Gentile, rich or poor. None of it matters in this kingdom. What matters is belief. Through these encounters, Matthew 4's message keeps echoing. The kingdom has come near, not to one people, but to all. And this is what makes Jesus' mission unstoppable. His miracles are not limited by place, status, or sin. He brings heaven wherever he walks. Sometimes he teaches with parables. Other times, he simply acts, letting compassion speak louder than any sermon. And in every moment, one truth becomes clear. Heaven is not a distant realm. It's a presence that transforms everything it touches. When he heals, it's not just physical, it's spiritual. When he forgives, it's not just mercy, it's restoration. When he speaks, hearts recognize the voice of the one who made them. The disciples, though still learning, start to understand that following him is more than witnessing wonders. It's about carrying his heart into a hurting world, because soon he'll ask them to do the same, to heal, to serve, to love. For now, they walk behind him through dusty roads, amazed and overwhelmed. Every day brings new faces, new stories, new reminders that the kingdom of heaven isn't coming someday. It's already here. And yet, beneath all the miracles, there's a growing sense that something deeper is unfolding. Jesus isn't just fixing bodies, he's restoring humanity. He's showing what it looks like when love rules instead of fear, when compassion leads instead of control. The same hands that touched the leper will soon carry a cross. The same voice that calmed the storm will soon cry out for the lost. Because this mission, this light, was never about comfort. It was about redemption. As the disciples drift to sleep that night, they hear the waves gently touching the shore, the stars bright above them. Somewhere in the distance, a healed man sings quietly, his voice floating across the water. And Jesus prays alone again, the same quiet strength he had in the wilderness, still guiding him now. The sea was calm when they left the shore. The moon hung low, silver on the water, and the disciples' laughter echoed over the quiet waves. After days of teaching and healing, this boat ride felt like a breath of rest. Jesus had told them, "Let's cross to the other side." Simple words. So they obeyed. But even simple journeys can turn into storms. As the boat drifted farther from land, the sky began to change. The wind picked up, small ripples turning into restless waves. The laughter faded. The sea, once peaceful, grew dark and wild. Rain started to fall. The waves rose higher. The disciples gripped the sides of the boat, their voices rising above the storm. "Where is he?" Peter shouted. They turned and found Jesus, asleep at the back of the boat, his head resting on a cushion. Even in chaos, he was calm. They couldn't believe it. Water was pouring in, and their teacher, their miracle worker, was asleep. "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." He opened his eyes slowly, as if waking from a deep, peaceful dream. The storm howled, the waves slammed against the boat, but his gaze was steady. He stood up, faced the wind, and said softly, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Then, turning toward the sea, he raised his hand and said, "Peace, be still." And just like that, silence. The wind stopped. The waves smoothed into glass. The rain faded into mist. The storm obeyed him. The disciples stared at the calm water, then at Jesus, speechless. "What kind of man is this?" one whispered. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." But deep inside, something shifted. It wasn't just fear turning to awe, it was understanding. The same voice that called light out of darkness was standing in their boat. The same word that shaped creation now whispered peace into their chaos. They had seen him heal others, but now they saw him save them. And that's often how faith grows. Not through comfort, but through storms. It's in the moments when everything feels out of control that his power becomes personal. When fear screams the loudest, faith learns to whisper back, "He's here." That night stayed with them forever. Because after the sea calmed, something deeper began to stir. A quiet realization that following Jesus wasn't about avoiding storms. It was about discovering peace within them. The next morning, they reached the other side, the region of the Gadarenes. The air was heavy, the land wild and lonely. 2 men, possessed by unclean spirits, lived among the tombs there. No one dared go near them. No one except Jesus. The demons recognized him instantly. "What do you want with us, Son of God?" they cried. "Have you come to torment us before the time?" With a single command, he set the men free. The unclean spirits fled into a herd of pigs, which rushed down the steep bank into the water. The villagers came running, terrified yet amazed. They saw the 2 men, once violent, now sitting quietly, fully restored. But instead of worship, fear took hold of them. They begged Jesus to leave their region. So he did. He never forced his presence. Love never does. But the man who'd been set free begged to follow him. Jesus told him gently, "Go home to your people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you." And he did, becoming the first missionary in that region, carrying light back into the place where he once lived in darkness. Everywhere Jesus went, faith began like that, small, trembling, uncertain, then growing into bold testimony. But the disciples still had more to learn, because not long after, another storm would come, not on the water this time, but within their hearts. They had seen power. Now they would learn trust. One evening, Jesus told them to go ahead in the boat while he stayed behind to pray. The sea was calm at first, but by midnight, the wind returned. The waves beat against the boat, the same fear creeping back. The memory of that first storm was still fresh, but this time, he wasn't with them. Or so they thought. Hours later, in the dark distance, they saw a figure walking on the water. They froze. "It's a ghost," someone cried. But then came a familiar voice. "Take courage. It is I, don't be afraid." Peter, always bold, called out, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said one word, "Come." Peter stepped out of the boat. For a moment, he did the impossible, walking on water toward the Son of God. The wind roared, but his eyes were fixed on Jesus. Then he looked down. The waves seemed higher, the storm louder, the fear stronger, and he began to sink. "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out and caught him. "You of little faith," he said softly. "Why did you doubt?" They climbed back into the boat, and again, the wind died down. This time, no one questioned who he was. They fell to their knees and said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." That's what the storms were for, not punishment, but revelation. Through the wind and waves, they discovered who he truly was. And it's the same for every believer. We all face nights when the sea feels too strong, when our faith feels too small. But the story of Matthew 4, the story that began with "Follow me," reminds us that every storm is a classroom for trust. Faith isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep looking toward him, even when fear feels louder. Jesus doesn't promise calm seas. He promises his presence. And that presence changes everything. That night, as dawn began to rise, the disciples watched the horizon glow gold again. The sea shimmered, quiet and endless. And somewhere between the waves and the silence, their hearts began to understand. The one who rules the storm also rules their hearts. He doesn't just calm seas, he transforms souls. He doesn't just save lives, he teaches trust. The day had been long. Thousands had followed Jesus into the hills, men, women, children, drawn by his words, his touch, his presence. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky gold and red. But no one wanted to leave. They were tired, hungry, yet unwilling to step away from the one who spoke life into every word. The disciples, practical and concerned, came to him quietly. "Lord," one said, "it's getting late. Send the people away so they can find food in the nearby villages." Jesus looked out at the crowd, faces filled with hope, exhaustion, and need. He turned to his disciples and said something unexpected. "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." The disciples froze. "We have only 5 loaves and 2 fish, they said, glancing at the small bundle in their hands. Jesus smiled, not frustrated, not surprised. "Bring them here to me," he said. He told the people to sit down on the grass. The crowd quieted. A soft breeze moved across the hillside. Then Jesus took the bread and the fish, lifted his eyes toward heaven, and gave thanks. And as he broke the bread, something miraculous began to happen. The loaves didn't run out. The fish didn't disappear. He kept breaking and breaking and breaking, and there was always more. The disciples, stunned, began handing out food. Basket after basket, person after person. No one was left hungry. The little they had became more than enough in his hands. By the time everyone ate, there were 12 baskets of leftovers. 5,000 men, not counting women and children, had eaten until they were full. The miracle wasn't just about food. It was a living picture of heaven's heart. God doesn't give in scarcity. He gives in abundance. He doesn't meet needs reluctantly. He meets them overflowing. That's what Jesus wanted them to see. What's impossible for us is effortless for him. And when he asked the disciples to feed the people, it wasn't because he needed their resources. He wanted to reveal what happens when they place their small in his hands. That's still how faith works. It's never about how much we have. It's about who we give it to. The disciples would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Because later, when the church began to grow, they'd find themselves in places where resources were scarce, hearts were weary, and needs seemed endless. And they'd remember, he multiplies what we surrender. After the crowd ate, Jesus sent them away gently and then told his disciples to go ahead in the boat. He stayed behind, alone with his Father in prayer. It's a quiet image, the Son of God kneeling on a mountain under the stars, talking to his Father. Even after miracles, he sought solitude, because every act of power came from a place of communion. The next morning, the crowds returned. They had seen the miracle, and they wanted more. But Jesus knew their hunger went deeper than bread. He said to them, "You seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate and were filled. Do not labor for the food that perishes, but for the food which endures to eternal life." They didn't understand. "What must we do to do the works of God?" they asked. Jesus answered, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he sent." Then he said words that would echo through eternity. "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst." It wasn't just about filling stomachs, it was about filling souls. He was offering himself as the true nourishment, the living word that sustains life forever. The people murmured. Some couldn't accept it. They wanted miracles, not meaning. But a few, their hearts stirred, understood. Because when Jesus broke that bread, he wasn't just feeding bodies. He was giving a glimpse of what would come at the Last Supper, when he'd break bread again and say, "This is my body, given for you." That hillside was more than a miracle. It was a prophecy in motion. It showed that heaven's love doesn't just meet needs, it sacrifices to save. Later that evening, when the crowds left, Jesus walked along the shore, the sound of the waves steady and calm. He knew many had followed him for what they could receive, not for who he truly was. But still, his compassion never faded. He fed them anyway. He healed them anyway. He loved them anyway. Because that's the heart of God, giving, even when unreciprocated. The disciples would soon face their own moments of hunger, not physical, but spiritual. Moments when they'd feel empty, confused, and weak. And that's when these memories would return. Baskets overflowing, bread multiplied, hearts awakened. The lesson was simple. When you bring your nothing to him, he makes it enough. That miracle didn't end on that hillside. It continues every time someone chooses faith over fear, generosity over holding back, hope over despair. Because the bread of heaven is still feeding hearts today, one broken piece at a time. And in that moment, as the disciples gathered the leftover fragments, Jesus watched them quietly, smiling. Every crumb was a reminder that nothing given to God is ever wasted. The night deepened. The crowds went home. The disciples slept near the boat, exhausted, unaware that another test, another lesson of trust, waited just ahead on the water. But before they'd face that storm, Jesus' words still echoed across the hillside. I am the bread of life. He had come not just to feed the world, but to redeem it, to fill every empty soul with the everlasting love of God. Jesus has spent years healing the sick, calming storms, feeding thousands, and teaching truth that set people free. But now his steps grow slower, more deliberate. Every miracle, every word, every journey has led to this. The disciples sense it too. There's a heaviness in the air, a quiet tension between awe and fear. Crowds still follow, shouting his name, waving palm branches, calling him king. But the king they celebrate is not the king they expect. He rides it on a donkey, not a stallion. He comes in peace, not with an army. The same people who cheer will soon whisper against him. Because when heaven's truth confronts earthly pride, the world always resists. In the evenings, he walks to the Mount of Olives. From there, he can see the temple, the heart of religion and tradition, shining under the moonlight. And he weeps, not because he fears what's coming, but because he knows how blind the world has become. They crave signs and wonders, but not surrender. They admire miracles, but reject mercy. Still, he presses on. Because the love that began in Matthew 4, the love that faced temptation, the love that healed and forgave, must now face the cross. One night, in the upper room, he gathers his disciples. The table is simple: bread, wine, flickering light. The same hands that multiplied food on the hillside now break bread once again. He looks at them with eyes full of love and says, "This is my body, given for you." Then he lifts the cup. "This is my blood of the new covenant, poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." The disciples don't fully understand. The words sound heavy, final, but soon they will. After supper, they walk into the Garden of Gethsemane. The air is thick with silence. The olive trees sway gently under the night wind. Jesus kneels alone, his face to the ground, whispering to the Father, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." That's where the battle of salvation truly happens, not on the cross first, but in the surrender before it. He could have called angels. He could have turned away, but love held him there. Soon, torches flicker through the trees. Footsteps, voices. Judas arrives, leading the soldiers, betrayal heavy in his kiss. And Jesus, knowing all that's to come, simply says, "Friend, do what you came for." He's taken, bound, beaten, mocked by soldiers, abandoned by most of his followers. Peter, brave Peter, denies him 3 times, just as Jesus said he would. The rooster crows, and the sound echoes through the night like grief itself. By morning, the crowd has turned. The The same voices that once cried, "Hosanna," now scream, "Crucify him." They drag him through the streets, place a crown of thorns on his head, and lay a cross on his back. Each step up Calvary's hill is agony. But he walks it, for them, for us, for every wandering soul since Eden. At noon, the sky darkens. The world seems to hold its breath. And the Son of God, the same one who once stood on a mountain saying, "Blessed are the meek," now hangs between heaven and earth, arms stretched wide. The soldiers mock him. The crowd jeers. But from the cross, his voice rises, not in anger, but mercy. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Those words pierce the silence. Even creation trembles. The earth quakes. The temple veil tears from top to bottom, the barrier between God and humanity broken forever. Then, with one final breath, he says, "It is finished." Not a cry of defeat, but of victory. The mission that began in Matthew 4, when he faced temptation and chose obedience, is complete. The kingdom he preached, the forgiveness he offered, the light he carried, all fulfilled in that moment. The cross becomes the doorway back to God. For 3 days, silence fills the earth. The disciples hide, their hearts crushed. They remember his miracles, his laughter, his promise, but all seems lost. Then, before dawn on the 3rd day, the impossible happens. The stone rolls away. The tomb is empty, and light floods the darkness once more. Mary Magdalene stands outside, weeping. She hears a voice behind her. "Woman, why are you crying? Whom are you seeking?" She turns, and there he is, alive, radiant, the same gentle eyes, the same familiar voice. "Teacher," she whispers, falling to her knees. And with that single word, history changes forever. Death is defeated. Grace has triumphed. The wilderness, the mountain, the storms, the cross, all were part of one plan, to bring humanity back to God. When the disciples see him again, their fear turns into boldness. The same men who once trembled in storms now preach to nations. Because resurrection power doesn't just raise the dead, it raises courage, purpose, and faith. Before ascending to heaven, Jesus gives them one final command. "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, and surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." That promise echoes still. Every act of faith, every prayer whispered in weakness, every soul turning back to God, all trace back to that mountain in Matthew 4, where the Son of God first said, "Follow me." And the story hasn't ended. It continues through every heart that still believes. Because the wilderness taught us obedience. The mountain taught us truth. The storms taught us trust. The bread taught us compassion. And the cross revealed love that never dies. Now, when you read Matthew 4 again, it's no longer just about temptation or calling. It's the doorway to the entire mission of salvation. It's where heaven's plan began to walk among us, quietly, humbly, but with unstoppable power. And even now, when life feels like a wilderness, when storms rage or nights grow long, his words still whisper through the noise. "Follow me. Do not be afraid. I am with you always." Because the story of Matthew 4 isn't over. It lives in every believer who chooses faith in the middle of fear, surrender in the middle of struggle, and love in the middle of hate.